Now, I want to go back here and just make this a little bit more clearly. First of all, I just want to reread. I want to reread this passage, and I want to do it without interrupting it in any way. It says that it was on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, that they came unto the sepulchre, bringing the spice which they had prepared, and certain others with them, and they found the stone was rolled away from the sepulchre. And they entered in and found not the body of Jesus. And it came to pass, as they were much perplexed thereabout, behold, two men stood by with them in shining garments. And as they were afraid and bowed down their faces to the earth, they said unto them, Why seek ye the living among the dead? He is not here, but he is risen. Remember how he spake unto you when he was yet in Galilee, saying, The Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and the third day rise again. And they remembered his words, and returned from the sepulchre, and told all these things unto the 11, and to all the rest. It was Mary Magdalene and Johanna, and Mary the mother of James, and other women that were with them, which told these things unto the apostles. And their words seemed to be to them as idle tales, and they believed them not. Now, I like the fact that these women are playing such a significant role here, and they are about to embark upon the same challenges that many of us have today. There are many of us who talk about the return of Jesus as if it is something that is available to us in the here and now. And there are many other people that are waiting for an event, and they tend to look at the return of Jesus as almost like a date on the calendar. Some day when Jesus returns soon, all our pain will go away. We'll escape the tribulation, and we'll meet together in the air with the saints and rejoice with him. To people who don't believe, that in itself just seems like it's very sensational. But I think we can take some of the sensationalism out of the gospel if we start to look at the details and get an understanding of what Jesus is trying to reveal about himself. And in this case, the women faced a similar challenge because now they've encountered something that doesn't make any natural sense, and they have the challenge of bringing that to the very men who had walked with Jesus during his ministry. So it says that their words seemed to them as idle tales, and they did not believe them. Now, there's another question here that comes up that I think can also help us to search the scripture with an open heart. And it says, why do you seek the living among the dead? So obviously they're looking for the body of Jesus. And by comparison, many of us are looking for Jesus and hoping one day that we will see him. But many people don't believe that they are able to see Jesus until they go home to be with the Lord, or basically when they die. If you think back, God is not the God of the dead, but he's the God of the living. Even when it came to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, his response was that I'm not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. All right. We're not looking for the body of Jesus. What we're looking for is the resurrected spirit of Jesus. We're not looking for this physical date, calendar event, or sequence of things that happen here in this physical three-dimensional world, but a reality of spiritual things that can happen within this spiritual world, within this spiritual earth. All right. So you always have things in the scripture that are happening on many different levels at the same time. And I'll give you an example of that right here in this passage. Now, if we go back to the other major character outside of Mary Magdalene, both the Marys, Johanna and the other women, and then we were supposed to have the body of Jesus, but the body of Jesus is no longer there. There's also this introduction of these two men. We see two men and we think, oh, that's just two men. But let me just, in context, just say here that Mary has stumbled into one of the most spiritual things that could ever take place. The Son of God himself has been crucified on the cross, and she has entered into the sepulcher where the Son of God himself has been resurrected. The amount of spiritual activity that was likely to be happening in that sepulcher is probably more than what any natural mind could ever understand. And so even in reading these Gospels, we see these two men. But interestingly enough, we find that if we look in the other Gospels, with that same exact question, why do you seek the living among the dead? What we find is that the description of those two men is different in the cases of the other three Gospels. Since we're looking in Luke, that's Matthew, Mark, and John, we're not dealing with men at all. So here in Luke, we have two men. In verse 4, it says, 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. It came to pass, as they were much perplexed about, behold, 2 men stood by them in shining garments. 2 men in shining garments. What kind of men do we know that walk around with shining garments? Are those men? In Mark chapter 16, it's described as a young man sitting on the right side of the sepulchre, clothed in a long white garment. In Matthew chapter 28, it is simply an angel. Now, in the preceding verses, that angel is described as having a countenance like lightning and raiment as white as snow. In John chapter 20, as Mary enters the sepulchre weeping, it is described as 2 angels. So in one case, we have 2 men. In another case, it's two angels. In another case, it's a young man. In another case, it's the angel of the Lord. And so in our natural mind, you could say, well, which one is it? But in the spiritual mind, you can say that God is doing many things all at the same time. And if you want the consistency of the scripture, the confirmation, there's no contradiction here at all. What we find is that the defining attributes, so that color white is very important. And so in Mark 16:5, it says that the young man, even though we just here see the description of a young man, is being clothed in long white garment. So that white is important. So more key is Matthew 28, where it says the countenance is like lightning and raiment white as snow. So in Revelation chapter 1, white as snow is the exact same description that John provided when he described the appearance of the Lord as he had seen him through the revelation. Now, I want to, as a side note, mention here is that that's what we're dealing with. We're not dealing with an event, and we're not dealing with a matter of one verse compared to another one. What we're dealing with is a collective revelation, a collective series of supernatural events that are all happening at the same time, described in slightly different ways, but all pointing in the same direction. Here it's clear that the Lord is involved in this sepulcher, and that Mary has encountered this. And then arose Peter and ran to the sepulchre, and stooping down, he beheld the linen clothes laid by themselves, and departed, wondered in himself at that which was come to pass. And behold, 2 of them went that same day to the village called Emmaus, which was from Jerusalem about 60 furlongs, or about 7.5 miles. And they walked together, and they talked together of all these things which had happened. And it came to pass that while they communed together and reasoned, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. Right? So at that point, it hadn't yet been revealed what happened, why the body of Jesus was missing. And for the women, it had brought great sadness, right? The angel had reminded them of what the Lord had already spoken to them prior to the time of his death, which is that he would return from the dead. Okay? But their eyes were holden that they should not know him. This ties directly to the verse that we talked about where it says, and their words seemed to them as idle tales, and they believed them not. The women come with a message. The women come with the message that the body of Jesus is not there. The two men or the angels come with a message, and they say, why are you seeking the living among the dead? The body of Jesus is not here. He is risen from the dead. So the proclamation here is the fact that Jesus is back. Jesus is risen. The word goes to the women. The women bring the message to the disciples, and this message seems like an idle tale. It tells us why. It says because their eyes were holden that they should not know him. This is something that we need to consider when it comes to the return of Jesus. Is it that Jesus hasn't returned, or is it that we don't understand, our eyes don't perceive what the return really is? Is it that we've understood the natural hope of or possibility of one day coming in contact with a material, physical Jesus in the sky, but that our human flesh can't comprehend the ability for Jesus to appear in his people? It says their eyes are holden that they should not know him. And he said unto them, what manner of communication are these that ye have one to another as ye walk and are sad? In verse 18 it says, and the one of them whose name was Clopas answering said unto him, art thou only a stranger in Jerusalem, and hast not known the things which are come to pass there in these days? And he said unto them, what things? And they said, concerning Jesus of Nazareth, which was a prophet mighty in deed and word before God and all the people. They don't have an understanding that the one that they're talking to is Jesus. And even in talking to Jesus, when asked to witness about him, when drawn into question, they refer to Jesus as a prophet. So Jesus is really just testing the waters here to see how much of what he preached when he was alive in the natural did they actually get. If John the Baptist was more than a prophet, then why are they referring to Jesus of Nazareth, who was greater than John, as a prophet? You see, so Jesus can see that there's still a great need. Jesus, the resurrection, I should also add, is still in process, because even though Jesus has returned in physical form and carried about with the disciples here, there's still an issue with their eyes and their level of understanding that has to be adjusted. And he said to them, what things? And they said unto him, concerning Jesus of Nazareth, which was a prophet mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and have crucified him. But we trusted that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel. And beside all this, today is the third day since these things were done. Yea, and certain women also of our company made us astonished, which were early at the sepulchre. And when they found not his body, they came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels, which said that he was alive. You see that? So it said vision of angels, and yet we saw in the scripture where it actually said two men. So you understand that the Bible is often written on multiple levels. There's a reason why it said two men in one gospel, and why it said angels in another, and why it said young man in another. It's just revealing different layers in the spirit of the same event. The way we know it's the same event is because all of those angels, those young men, they all stem from that exact same question. Why do you seek the living among the dead? Right? That's the speaker of that question is in fact the same, and yet it's referred to as a different character across the Gospels, right? In verse 24, it says, "And certain of them which were with us went to the sepulchre and found it, even so as the women had said, but him they saw not. And then he said unto them, O fools, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory? And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scripture the things concerning himself." He basically had to, after all the teaching that he did when he was alive, here it is, Jesus now has come back from the dead, and he has to reiterate everything about himself now that he's in his resurrected form. Many of us have enough understanding about Jesus and about his return based on who he was physically, based on our natural experience. But there's a whole nother experience with Jesus on the other side of the cross, the resurrected form of Jesus. And in this case, we see a strong example of Jesus himself having to represent the gospel from his new spiritual body. There's another impartation that has to go out. The disciples and the women have to be retrained. They used their natural eye. They had natural experiences. And now he's trying to usher them into a spiritual experience. And they drew nigh unto the village whither they went, and he made as though he would have gone further. But they constrained him, saying, Abide with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is far spent. And he went in to tarry with them. I just want you to think about, so this is a 7.5 mile journey, and Jesus is literally walking along and talking with him. And so you have to ask yourself, for people that had been very intimate with Jesus, why is it that they weren't able to recognize him? Well, at a surface level, you could easily say that is what they say here in verse 16, which is that their eyes were holden, that they should not know him. But I would say that that same condition is the same reason why so many people misunderstand the return of Jesus. Is because they don't have the ability to see from a different perspective. It's the recognition that they're really struggling with. It's not the fact that it didn't happen. It's the recognition that it's not that Jesus isn't there. It's that their eyes are withholding. It's not that the return of Jesus is not a reality. It's just that their ability to decipher it is difficult. This recognition problem not only happened with Jesus as his man ministry while he was on the earth with groups such as the Pharisees and Sadducees, but it also happened amongst the disciples after Jesus rose from the dead and presented himself in spiritual form, where they didn't believe it was him, didn't understand it was him, even though he walked and talked with them. We also know that Thomas would not believe unless he saw the holes in Jesus' hands. So we keep seeing this trend of things that God was doing and yet could not be understood due to the inability of the human eyes to perceive the more spiritual truth.